Yeah, I think I love the evolution of the character. And he says himself, he's still not Kingpin. You have not seen the Kingpin yet, my friend.
Huh.
No.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch the rest of it. It's really good so far. I like it. All right, tattoos.
Yeah. On the button.
So today I thought I would talk about, or we would talk about I would introduce the idea of the apprenticeship dilemma. I wrote a blog post, a Fireside Weekly post last week about kind of a challenge that today's apprentices face, and more importantly, today's mentors face, because the tattoo environment's so competitive. And I started thinking, like, God, what would my apprenticeship, my upbringing in tattooing, where would it have placed me if it were happening today? And the answer is it would have placed me at the very bottom, because I would not at all be prepared based on my apprenticeship to tackle the tattoo challenges that young artists are tackling today. I mean, they're really doing a lot of nice work early on. And then I started thinking, like, well, there are so many people that are coming out of art school, so many accomplished artists, people like great draftsmen, draftswomen, great painters that are moving into tattooing. And so we have a brand new challenge ahead of us, which is allowing those up and comers to keep their voice, to keep their mark making, to keep stylistically what they're good at, while still teaching them the tricky medium of tattooing. So to a certain extent, you have to change the way they make. Well, it's true. You may have to change the way they make marks, but does that affect the way that they draw, or what makes them, what drew you to them to take them on in the first place? You know what I mean? Like, obviously you look at a portfolio, you have a new apprentice right now, and you look through the portfolio and you say, wow, he does this well, he does that well. How do you teach him to tattoo without destroying those things that he is good at?
Like, boom, that's it, right?
Boom.
Well, I think that is hard. I think first it's like most things, it's you take what they're doing, and then you show them why sometimes it doesn't work in tattooing. Like we started to work on pigskin, where you're basically seeing, it's like, okay, if you throw thousands of marks in, what that looks like overall, even if you're doing them in gray wash, depending on the actual size of the line. It's all experiment, trying to work with what they're comfortable with, and then trying to show them what probably will look better, and then teach them like that fine line between. I think that some people's styles lend itself to tattooing very easily, where if they're already kind of accomplished draftsmen, persons, you're fairly comfortable with it. But if you're working in different mediums, if you're especially more adept at, say, watercolor or painting, you may not be nearly as probably comfortable with tattooing, because it's such a line heavier, stencil oriented medium, especially when you first start. I think you can work back into what you want to do on paper, but you have to find that fine line or that medium between it at first. And it's mainly because if usually they come to you and you're teaching them, you're going to teach them how you tattoo,
right?
And then what you've overcome, or how you overcome some of those steps, and then hopefully they see what they can kind of push into their own work later. At first, you just want them to do, say, simple, tight, clean work, while that may not be frilly, and it might not be what they want to do, but learning the basics and learning, say, the rote movements that sometimes you have to do, where you're really comfortable mark making or line making. When you first start with a new machine, there's no way that you can replicate the same lines or the same drawing that you would when you've got a couple years under your belt. There's just no way you would draw the same design. You would find, like, where you have to leave space for yourself, where you can't put in a bunch of linear movements or strokes that create like cross-hatching, because a lot of times they'll create a darker kind of mood to the whole kind of piece, where you're not getting the same kind of finesse, or the same, like I said, the difference between probably how they draw with, like, what instrument. Like, if you draw with pencils and you're very comfortable with that, like, trying to learn how to work within, say, an ink pen or a piteograph or something like that is more of a step up instead. So because you can get looser with a pencil, and you cannot be very loose with a machine when you first start.
Especially when you first start, yeah. And you mentioned that we naturally want to teach them the way that we make marks, the way that we tattoo, because it's how you know to teach. It's how you describe the obstacles that you overcame. But the challenge there is that they may not make marks or do anything similar to what you do.
But I think that's the thing where you obviously when you first start too, you're making them observe you tattoo and other people tattoo, and then that way they can see how each person puts in a tattoo. Now I always say this, it's like, just do what I say, don't do what I do. Often it's like, just because you see me doing something that's a little more technically involved or something that I'm more comfortable with and you don't understand how I'm doing it, either ask me about it, but don't just immediately
assume that's the way to do it.
Exactly. And often because we've talked before about how to like first get someone comfortable with like just a drawing for a tattoo, and then teaching them like the nature of the grain of the skin and things like that, or the nature of 3D on the surface and how to kind of push and play with that. That's a whole different field. It's like at first you start with just the fundamentals and the basics, and then just because you see me doing something doesn't mean you easily replicate it. And so and that's what I mean. It's like putting that in your back of your head, or putting that, it's like that's what you're learning too. But when you first start, it's the basics, just good, solid line making, and that might not be comfortable for a lot of people that do not make good, solid lines, or do not do. Well, I say illustration based, but it could be any type of say linear. Thought out draft, and
there are plenty of artists that make great tattoos that are not line based artists, but they're experienced artists. And I agree with you that one of the biggest challenges is that early on, the designs have to be fairly simplistic, and they almost always need to be reinforced with lines, with nice line work, especially simple designs. I think it's just like a basic fundamental element of good tattooing, and you need to know it whether or not you're truly a line-based artist in your other mediums, because you'll have to find ways to apply it in tattooing.
We've definitely, I've seen a lot of artists that are very comfortable with like shading and the color, because it's a different process. It's a little easier to learn. It's a little easier to pick up. It's a little more natural emotion for people. But if you can't put in a line, it's an easy tell for most people why they're doing probably really bad tattoos. One, it probably lends to that contrast if you're not able to like work and play with that, how dark things should be. It's just going to destroy how much dimension you're getting if you're not going to be able to put in tight lines, or lines that have a little dimension to them, that have a little buffering to them, that have a little weight to them.
I mentioned in the blog post that I wrote, and I don't know what you think about it because I didn't consult you first, but I mentioned that if we try to teach,
you didn't have to consult me.
We try to teach the artists to become better problem solvers, instead of presenting exactly how we solve that problem, presenting the problem from an experienced tattooer standpoint, like. Instead of saying something like, well, that line is shaky because you really need to draw from your elbow or from your shoulder to make a straighter line. Well, that's the way I might make a straighter line. Right. It may not be the way they make a nice line.
Right. That's
so instead of giving those specific instructions, present the problem and allow them to solve it.
That's really what it is. It's and often because they're an artist, they have a natural way about doing things. You're going to find what is the natural way of doing things, and if it seems counterintuitive, it usually is. I mean, even when you're making movements on a person and working with machinery, if it's counterintuitive and it overworks you and you're getting tired and you're it's hurting your hand and stuff, there's obviously problems. You're not learning the mechanics. While you might let me see. That's probably part of it. It's like it's just doing it over and over and over again. And I think it goes back to like what we do, even now is like when he brings in a drawing is like how to reduce his drawing to make it better and to make it more tattooable. And so his own art is not influenced by hopefully what he's bringing to the table as far as tattoo designs.
So you're having him draw the way that he draws and then modify as necessary,
and often showing him with just an eraser how to get rid of so many linear textural lines that are for him. Maybe they're mapping lines. Maybe there's something he's going to use as a way of shading off of later. But when you look at it on a design, like you look at it in a drawing, it's too many lines. It's too much going on.
Well,
and it's something when you first start, it's like you should have that. If you're going to look at an object anyway, if you have a resource, like if you're doing a color composition for that anyway, You shouldn't need all of that.
All that indication in the line.
You shouldn't need that all that. Yeah.
And what they'll find is that it turns into a messy stencil anyways, and
and that's exactly what it is.
They'll probably fix that on their own after they lay a few stencils. And some
Especially
of that stuff.
if you've never tried to put some stencils on a pork skin, man, let me tell you, it's wholly different from human skin.
Man, I haven't
Human
watched
skin
anyone
just sucks it
tattoo pig skin in so long, and coming in and looking at his finished tattoos is making me nauseous every day. It's disgusting.
And
then you're
smell?
like pushing all on it and showing what he did right and wrong. I'm like,
yeah. The other day,
gross.
The other day, Angela came in. She was like, "Whoa." I was like, I had to cover the end.
It was like a hoof one day. It just had this nasty, gnarly hoof hanging off, and just like his bone sawed.
Man, you can get those. By the way, Memphis, just like, especially at the Kroger, you can get pork feet all day.
Can you?
And just like, you can smoke them.
Nice tattoo
chew on them.
Yeah.
Like bubble gum.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can tattoo on them. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I kind of think, and you've apprenticed a lot of people, and that's why I thought it was important to get your take on it, is that, even before the tattoo, you were talking about him bringing his drawings in the way that he would naturally draw them, and then explaining where the challenges might lie and letting him figure out how to solve that problem rather than just taking the reins from him. And, one thing that I brought up in the post was, instead of saying exactly what you think the problem is and how you would solve it, maybe just presenting the issue like, hey, that this area is kind of confusing to me, that these things kind of compete for, or whatever, or that whole design looks kind of bottom heavy to me, or whatever. Find a way to solve that problem.
I like bottom heavy though.
Yeah, I like bottom heavy too.
I think that's part of it. At first, it's like, you don't want to take enough away that they're not interested in the drawing. You don't want to make it so sterile that they're not into it. But also, you have to show them the kind of the fallacies, of course, and that's the real problem. They have they have no real understanding until they've got a couple of tattoos, or even, we say, the pork skin, the fake tattoos under their belt, because then you can see it's like, okay, here's a 1-to-1. You're drawing with a certain line weight. Here's a needle that's close to that line weight, and when you try to put it into the skin, it does not react like a piece of paper does. You cannot get the finest little things. You have to work to get that. I can do it because I've done it for 20-something years. You have to learn what those edges are like. You have to learn what the kind of the permutations of the needles, like where and why they do the things they do, before you're ever like going to bring your own ideas of your design elements into the design. Learning just a good, steady, clean tattoo is probably the first part of it. I've never told somebody your style is not going to work for tattooing. I think anyone that brings their competency in their own work to it, you're just going to learn a way to do the way that you draw and work.
That's exactly how to the medium,
the craft.
That's exactly how I wrapped the post up. I think the best.
I didn't even read it.
Yeah, I think the best artists will find their. I know you didn't read it. I think the best artists will find their way to translate what they do to the craft.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people will fall by the wayside because they'll get frustrated, and they probably should. There's plenty of tattooers around. We don't need a trillion more, so we'll weed out the ones that aren't willing to make it work.
And that's the first thing we look for too. Is like, when we're looking at someone that can make their own ideas and put those on paper. That they're not exasperating themselves by trying to look at everything around them and then translate that. Like, I don't want you to be someone else. I want you to be you. Be comfortable with what you're drawing, and then that'll push you, hopefully, because you're going to want to see your work pushed into the field. And then, like I said, to translate that is going to take time and effort. It's just it's like you learning a new language. You cannot speak that language at first. You have to hear it. You have to understand it. You have to see it coming out of someone else's lips. You have to see it on the working page. You're reading it, you're absorbing it, and then you go, one day, all of a sudden, boom, you're there, and then you can put yours back in.
Yeah. I think that's a pretty good analogy.
Thanks, man. I tried.
That was great. Yeah, I agree. I absolutely do. I do think early on, the biggest hurdle that I see is early on, whenever you're having to dumb down designs for competent artists. I think that's really where a lot of people if they're going to get discouraged, that's an easy place to end up becoming discouraged because they know they're capable of more than what they're producing.
Yeah. I mean, the average person, when they come in the door, just remember you're going to feel like, oh, somehow you're superior because you've done all these. That's not. I mean, you should just be comfortable. Every exercise in tattooing is a new way of getting closer to what you want to achieve. Don't belittle yourself because you have to do small stuff to get to a certain plateau in a place. Like every tattoo is you like trying to hopefully talk to that person into doing something that you want to do. Right. Like every one of those is another opportunity, whether you know it or not. It's easy for people not to push themselves to not talk to a person about that next tattoo. But if you're doing good, clean work, they may give you an opportunity given the chance down the road. You just don't know that. So if you treat everybody like, oh, I'm doing this basketball again, or oh, I'm doing some lettering, it's like that person's a sleeve in a year or two. You just don't know it,
Yeah. Some book that I've been reading lately. I forget exactly who when I say read a book, I mean listen. I listen to audiobooks. But one that I was listening to earlier this week or last week talked about that in a different way. It wasn't about art at all, but it was talking about like, if you're sweeping floors.
I'm not sweeping floors.
But whatever it is that you're doing, you owe it to yourself and to everyone to do the absolute best that you can. You can't just simply say like, this isn't what I'm meant to do. I'm only doing this to get through law school. I don't give a shit about these floors or whatever. It's like right now you're sweeping floors, right? And it's an opportunity for you to do the best job sweeping the floor that you can. So if you're stuck doing letters, it's an opportunity to make every edge as clean as you can possibly make it. It's a challenge that you should take the same way that you were taking on a full back piece or a sleeve, right, and make it the absolute best that you can. And that's the only way you'll compete today.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Maybe it's a test of your competency. We've definitely gotten to a place where we try to have a certain minimum now, where we've removed ourselves from it. But I often still have people come in that will only get tattooed by me for one reason or another, and I can't say no. There's not like they're not going to wait for someone else, and so you still having to do a good, clean, say heart, banner, name, date, color, but that's what you do. Like you do roses on people too. You do flowers on people because that's what they want. Again, they will translate in the long run. Those people will always get things later, or their friends will, that will make it worth the while. Everything's worth the while, but
we're probably a little bit off subject. But speaking of those,
I don't know.
Speaking of those,
talking about Olivia Munn.
About who?
Olivia Munn. No, never mind.
She's
Comic-Con. Comic-Con was all this week too. We didn't really talk about that.
No, we haven't talked about Comic-Con. No. Right. Adam Shaw, who was on a few episodes
X-Men.
ago, is at Comic-Con, or was. Is it over?
Yeah, it should be over now.
But talking about being stuck doing something like a rose or a banner or this or that, it's a perfect opportunity to find a way. Those are the kinds of things that no matter how you work stylistically, you can generally find a way with something organic like that to work your style into it. The problem comes if you really are so soft and so painterly and you're just moving into tattooing that you might struggle to translate that early on.
That's true. Especially if your stuff is very watercolory or very, like I said, very light or muted, and depends on that. It's very hard to kind of build that up and be very comfortable with that because you don't get instant results like you do with a black line. You just don't. Yeah. There's not as much impact, and you don't have as much call for it. Like today, there is a big, huge call for like watercolor tattoos, and stuff like that are like right over, but probably what are heavily lined or even they maybe look sketchy, but those are really punched lines. You have to be really comfortable with your style to emulate another style, especially like that, because that's not a natural style for a lot of people. You have to be quick and,
Yeah, it has to give the illusion of immediacy and all that kind of stuff. But it's not immediate at all. It's very deliberate.
It's very deliberate and very thought out, especially when you do it as a tattoo.
Yeah, there's no such thing as immediacy in tattooing.
You can't just whip that stuff out. You are absolutely like a Xerox machine at that point.
Yeah. So if you were someone that was, that is a fairly accomplished artist, if there were a couple of bullet points that you could give someone, what to you are the most important elements of making a successful tattoo drawing, if you were a painter that's trying to get into tattooing, are there any quick tips that you could implement in your drawings and your illustrations and your paintings to make them more tattooable?
Well,
is line work the most important thing? Contrast the most important thing?
It is for me, but I think before that is something that I learned maybe when I got into graphic design that was not something that I thought would be instantly kind of translatable into tattooing for me, and that's the idea of the thumbnail. Like often I draw very quick, very loose thumbnails at sizes that I'm very comfortable with, and then those lead me to better drawings. And so if you're not comfortable with doing thumbnails, if you do these in a different way, get comfortable with doing thumbnails, because that is quick hand motions, quick mark making, and quick idea referencing for you, that when you're talking to someone or you're trying to, often I have to admit, I don't like to work or draw in front of people. It's because they often try to change things when I'm doing, but I've seen other people that are very comfortable with that. And so I think you find your own rule for that. But if you're doing really decent thumbnails, and you're doing those quickly, you will often see that you're making better decisions more quickly in your drawings. So I don't know if that's a tattoo point per se, but I think if you're worried about like coming up with other ideas or working from other mediums or whatever, quick translation is often being able to lay that out. Show yourself what size or what angle or what dimension you should put to it very quickly, and if that's not working, go on to another one and try to work it in another way. Don't get so focused that you get really frustrated with one idea, when often if you go through two or three quickly, you'll find a better resolution.
Yeah, I think thumbnails are a great idea, just simply because they, to me, contrast and composition are incredibly important in building a nice tattoo, even if it's a single element, how it sits, the angle it's presented, things like that. And whenever you're, when you make thumbnails, you're forced to deal with all right, what we talk about hierarchy all the time. Right. You're forced to establish that hierarchy quickly. You're forced to address this, map the space, address the space. Where does the most important element sit in the space? And I know you do that in painting and in drawing and other things too, but it's the, you can't really fiddle with it in tattooing. It has to be very deliberate. You have to know why something sits where it sits. Is it the darkest object? Is it the lightest object? If so, why? And thumbnails are great for that.
Great for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the one I think that's pretty good. I like that one.
Even out of my butt.
Yeah, to me, if it would be contrast, I think really for longevity in tattooing, you have to push contrast in tattooing to be successful. I know a lot of painters that do fantastic, subtle work. I know artists that work in pencil or work in watercolor or whatever that do really beautiful, subtle transitions. And if you're trying to make your way into tattooing, that might be something you can do 10 years down the road. You may find tricks to make that work. There are tattooers doing it. Early on, to make a tattoo live a long time, you have to push contrast, and I think that's the simplest way to improve, to do nice tattoos right from the start, because it shows that you're confident. It shows that you're deliberate.
It also shows that you're aware, especially working on skin tone, that you need some overall contrast. A lot of people, when you've been working on a piece of white paper and you're not used to actually toning the paper, toning the canvas and stuff, I think it probably is a disadvantage. While if you actually paint, that might be quite an advantage, that that you need to layer a little bit more. I mean, we've always talked about a lot of tattooing. It's like grease-eye painting, that you a lot of times are doing a bit of an under painting to it. That's a great translation. I guess I still think, a lot of, if you've got to start doing something like right now and It's basically working out ideas quicker. It's almost like chess over speed chess. It will make you quicker on your decision making, and in your thumbnails you can be, like you said, you can actually play with the contrast quite a bit. You can lay that out quickly before you ever put another real pencil mark or lay whatever that final line drawing down.
Yeah, in my thumbnails, they're really mostly masses to start. I don't draw with a lot of lines in my early drawings. I really turn the pencil on its side and I block in shapes. Because if I start drawing in lines and everything flattens out to me right off the bat, and if I start drawing in masses from the very start, then I feel like I'm making some important decisions right off the bat. Thanks, Rogue. Well, we're finished with this beer. I guess we're done with the podcast.
Pretty close. Is there anything else? I mean,
No.
could you say that, don't be discouraged when you first get into it at first. You will find that there are easy ways to translate your style into each piece. But do it,
after you've learned the fundamentals.
After you've learned the fundamentals, and do it in degrees, work it in slowly. And that way, you'll know why you can and can't do some things. I wish I'd have learned that.
Yeah. I wish that that young tattooers had more opportunities to see their healed work and to work into these pieces repeatedly. Usually they're doing such small tattoos that's kind of unreasonable to ask people to come back over and over. But
it's not.
Yeah,
First of all, it's really not. We've done it. We've asked, hey, will you come back in 2 or 3 weeks just so you can take a look at it and maybe get a touch up? And they're fine with that. I mean, if you ask them, if you say, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to actively do. The problem is that you're often having to give away a lot of time to make sure that each piece is as nice as the next, is as nice as the last, is as good as the first, is whatever.
If you can do that, I think it's one of the most important things. And I think it's important for the mentors. I mean, we're addressing the tattooer, but really what I was focused on when I wrote that post was about how we, as people that know how to tattoo, teach people to tattoo while still keeping their mark making. And I think whenever we see how their work is coming back, it will help us to guide a little better as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
And not control. Cause I think the worst thing we can do is just create a bunch of mini-me's. If you're creating another tattooer that's just like you, well, you really haven't done very much. If you're creating a unique artist, well, then that's great.
Yeah, especially if you're pushing them into a style that looks nothing like their actual style. I think if you learn a certain way and you learn, if you're, like I said, if you're competent with your mark making, at a certain point though, you're 5-7 years in, your style will change. It will absolutely change. Once you have a really, say, a recognition, you'll want to experiment, you'll want to play, you will find your own voice back in it. But just don't try it in that first year or two if you can. That may be hard because some people, they keep pushing their own things over the practicality of tattooing. And if it keeps beating you in the face, wake up, listen, just for half a second.
Yeah. All right. I hope that helps. Our beers are empty. It's hot in here. I had to turn the air conditioner off. It's like 110 in Memphis today.
Yeah, Memphis has gotten a lot warmer. It's all right, though.
Yeah, it's all right. All right, subscribe on our YouTube channel. Go to firesidetats.com and join our mailing list. Give us a thumbs up on all the social medias. We'll be at the Ink and Iron Festival in a couple of weeks in Nashville. Hopefully,
Nash Vegas.
David will be there too. Next week, this coming weekend, we'll be in Atlanta. We're talking to Russ Abbott. We're talking to...
About his fine color wheel.
We have... Oh, who else? Brandon David from Ink and Iron. From Ink and Dagger. We have Clinton Lee. If you're in Atlanta and you want to buy us a beer, feel free to send a message. We're also talking to a couple of painters, hopefully. We've got Paolo Chesi, who's a fantastic portrait painter. We've got 4 or 5 interviews this weekend. We're about to kill it.
Ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. We're blowing up. Yeah, probably not.
But this is a teaser, right?
It's a teaser.
Like, oh, wait.
Actually, it's entirely possible that Russ Abbott's interview will come out before this one just because we're trying to push the color wheel, so we'll see. Anyways, that's what we're doing this coming week, so stay tuned. And if you're in Atlanta,
ridiculous, right?
If you're in Atlanta, we'd love for you to buy us a beer.
Yeah, please.
Right. See you guys later.
Thanks, man.